The sun blazed overhead at Clearwater Beach Resort in Tampa Bay, Florida, painting the white sand in shades of gold while families scattered across the shoreline like colorful confetti. It was July 15, 2023, and the temperature had climbed to a sweltering 94 degrees. Palm trees swayed gently in the humid breeze, their fronds casting dancing shadows over beach umbrellas and lounge chairs. The sound of crashing waves mixed with children's laughter created the perfect symphony of summer vacation. Sarah Mitchell, 34 years old, adjusted her wide-brimmed hat as she watched her 8-year-old son Tommy build an elaborate sandcastle near the water's edge. His sandy blonde hair caught the sunlight as he worked with the focused determination that only children possess. Sarah's sister, Jennifer, 29, lounged on a beach chair nearby, her designer sunglasses reflecting the ocean as she scrolled through her phone with painted red nails. The air smelled of coconut sunscreen and salt water, while the distant sound of a beach volleyball game added to the atmosphere of carefree summer bliss. This was supposed to be their annual family reunion weekend, a tradition that had brought joy for the past 5 years. None of them could have imagined that this perfect day would soon transform into their worst nightmare, forever changing the bonds that held their family together. Behind the facade of their perfect beach vacation, tensions simmered between the two sisters like heat waves rising from the scorching sand. Sarah had always been the responsible one, the older sister who followed rules and put family first. She worked as a registered nurse at Tampa General Hospital, often pulling double shifts to provide for Tommy after her divorce 2 years earlier. Her ex-husband, Mark, had disappeared from their lives, leaving behind only monthly child support payments that barely covered Tommy's school expenses. Jennifer, on the other hand, had chosen a different path. As a social media influencer with over 200,000 followers, she lived a life of apparent luxury, traveling from one exotic location to another, documenting her adventures for the world to see. Her Instagram feed was filled with perfectly curated photos of expensive meals, designer clothes, and glamorous parties. But beneath the glossy surface, Jennifer harbored deep resentment toward her older sister. She felt that Sarah had always been their parents' favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong, while she was seen as the irresponsible younger sibling. The weight of these unspoken grievances had grown heavier with each passing year, creating an invisible wall between them that even their mother's attempts at family unity couldn't break down. As they sat on the beach that day, these tensions crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. 3 weeks earlier, Jennifer had surprised Sarah with an unexpected phone call. Her voice had been unusually warm as she suggested they take Tommy on a beach vacation to Clearwater, offering to pay for the entire trip. Sarah had been hesitant at first, knowing how strained their relationship had become, but the thought of giving Tommy a real vacation had melted her resistance. Money had been tight since the divorce, and they hadn't been able to afford a proper getaway in over a year. Jennifer had insisted on booking the most expensive beachfront resort, complete with a private cabana and access to the exclusive pool area. She had painted a picture of sisterly bonding and making precious memories with Tommy, who had always looked up to his glamorous aunt with wide-eyed admiration. What Sarah didn't know was that Jennifer had ulterior motives for this generous gesture. Her influence career had been struggling recently, with several major brand partnerships falling through due to negative publicity from her increasingly reckless behavior. She saw this family vacation as an opportunity to rebrand herself as a caring, family-oriented person, planning to document every moment for her social media platforms. The vacation wasn't about healing their relationship or creating memories with Tommy. It was about salvaging her reputation and gaining sympathy from her followers. But even Jennifer hadn't anticipated how far her selfish desires would ultimately push her. The first day at Clearwater Beach Resort had passed without incident, filled with typical vacation activities like building sandcastles, collecting seashells, and enjoying overpriced resort food. But by the second day, Sarah began noticing subtle changes in Jennifer's behavior that made her increasingly uncomfortable. Her sister seemed more interested in taking photos and videos than actually engaging with Tommy, often asking him to pose in specific ways or repeat actions that would look good on camera. When Tommy wanted to play in the shallow waves, Jennifer would redirect him to areas that provided better lighting for her shots. She had even brought a professional ring light and a portable tripod, turning their family beach day into an impromptu photo shoot. Sarah watched with growing concern as Jennifer prioritized getting the perfect content over Tommy's enjoyment or safety. During lunch at the resort's poolside restaurant, Jennifer had spent more time editing photos on her phone than talking to her nephew, who kept trying to show her the hermit crab he had found that morning. The little boy's enthusiasm gradually deflated as his aunt's attention remained focused on her screen, and Sarah felt a familiar protective anger rising in her chest. She had seen this pattern before: Jennifer's tendency to use people, even family members, as props in her carefully constructed online persona. But Sarah had never imagined that this selfish behavior could escalate into something truly dangerous. By the third day of their vacation, the resort was packed to capacity, with families taking advantage of the mid-July heat wave. The main pool area buzzed with activity as children splashed and played while parents sought refuge under umbrellas and cabanas. The concrete deck was scattered with colorful pool noodles, inflatable floats, and the occasional forgotten flip-flop. Lifeguards sat elevated in their white wooden chairs, vigilantly scanning the water through their polarized sunglasses, whistles hanging around their necks like badges of authority. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of chlorine mixed with tropical-scented sunscreen. Tommy had made friends with several other children staying at the resort, and they had formed a small pack that moved between the pool and the nearby beach throughout the day. Sarah felt comfortable letting him play with this group, as she could easily keep an eye on him from their cabana while still relaxing and reading the novel she had brought along. Jennifer, meanwhile, had discovered that the pool area provided the perfect backdrop for her content creation, with its crystal-clear water and palm tree landscaping creating an Instagram-worthy setting. She had been taking photos and videos throughout the morning, occasionally calling Tommy over to appear in her shots. The scene was bustling but peaceful, with the kind of organized chaos that comes with a popular family vacation destination during peak season. None of the hundreds of people enjoying the pool that day could have predicted that this ordinary afternoon would soon be shattered by an event that would haunt them all forever. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, Tommy approached Sarah with the eager excitement that only an 8-year-old could muster. His new friends wanted to have a swimming race across the resort's main pool, and he was practically bouncing with anticipation. The pool was large and designed for serious swimming, with a deep end that reached 9 feet, clearly marked with bold black numbers along the tiled edge. Sarah hesitated for a moment, knowing that Tommy was a decent swimmer but had never attempted anything quite so ambitious. The pool was busy but not overcrowded, and she could see at least 2 lifeguards stationed at opposite ends, their attention focused on the water. After a brief internal debate, she gave her permission, but with strict instructions: stay with the group, don't show off, and get out immediately if he felt tired. Tommy's face lit up with pure joy as he ran back to his friends, his small feet slapping against the wet concrete. Sarah repositioned herself on her lounge chair to have a clear view of the entire pool, her book forgotten as maternal instinct took over. She watched as the group of 5 children lined up at the shallow end, their excited chatter carrying across the water. Jennifer, who had been absorbed in editing photos on her phone, barely looked up when Sarah mentioned the swimming race. She simply waved a dismissive hand and murmured something about getting a good action shot. The sun was at its peak intensity, creating a glare on the water's surface that made it difficult to see clearly, but Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the pool, ready to jump in at the first sign of trouble. As the children prepared for their race, Jennifer suddenly became animated, realizing that this spontaneous swimming competition could provide excellent content for her social media platforms. She quickly grabbed her phone and, positioning herself at the pool's edge, began recording as the kids lined up. Through her phone screen, she watched as Tommy and his new friends prepared to dive in, their small bodies tense with competitive energy. The afternoon sun created perfect lighting conditions, and the excitement on the children's faces would translate beautifully to her followers, who loved authentic, family-friendly content. Jennifer had been struggling to find the right angle for her Fun Ant rebrand, and this moment seemed heaven-sent. She moved around the pool's perimeter, capturing different angles as the race began, completely absorbed in creating the perfect video montage. Her phone's camera focused on Tommy as he swam with determined strokes toward the deep end, his form surprisingly good for his age. Jennifer felt a surge of pride, not for her nephew's swimming ability, but for her foresight in capturing this moment. She could already envision the caption, "Nothing beats watching family push their limits and achieve their dreams," with various inspiring hashtags. The engagement would be tremendous, especially if she played up the emotional angle of being a supportive aunt. As she recorded, Jennifer became so focused on getting every angle and maintaining steady shots that she began to lose awareness of what was actually happening in the water. The line between documenting the moment and experiencing it had blurred completely, and she was now living entirely through her phone's screen. Halfway across the pool, Tommy began to struggle. What had started as confident strokes gradually became erratic splashing as fatigue set in faster than he had anticipated. The deep end of the pool seemed much farther than it had looked from the shallow end, and the water felt heavier somehow, dragging at his small limbs. The other children in the race were stronger swimmers, and they had already reached the opposite side, their victorious shouts echoing across the water. Tommy tried to call out, but his voice was weak and barely audible over the general noise of the crowded pool area. He attempted to tread water, but his technique was imperfect, and he found himself slipping beneath the surface repeatedly. Each time he managed to surface, he had less energy to stay afloat. The chlorinated water burned his throat as he accidentally swallowed mouthfuls, causing him to cough and lose even more breath. His small arms flailed desperately as panic began to set in, the kind of raw terror that only comes when death suddenly becomes a very real possibility. From her position at the pool's edge, Jennifer continued filming, completely unaware that her nephew was drowning just feet away from her. The viewfinder of her phone showed what appeared to be a child playing in the water, and she didn't recognize the signs of distress. Her focus remained on capturing the perfect shot, adjusting the angle and zoom to create the most compelling content possible. Meanwhile, Sarah had momentarily turned her attention to retrieve a bottle of water from their bag, trusting that the lifeguards were doing their job and that her sister was watching Tommy. The most chilling aspect of what happened next was how quietly it occurred. Movies and television had conditioned people to expect drowning to be a dramatic, splashing affair with screaming and obvious distress. But real drowning is often silent and quick, especially with children. Tommy's struggles became increasingly subdued as exhaustion overtook panic, his small body sinking beneath the surface with heartbreaking regularity. Each time he managed to surface, he had less strength to call for help, less energy to make the kind of commotion that would attract attention. The other pool guests, absorbed in their own vacation activities, didn't notice the quiet desperation playing out in the deep end. Jennifer, still recording through her phone, actually had the clearest view of what was happening, but she remained completely oblivious to the life-and-death situation unfolding in front of her. Her phone's camera captured every moment of Tommy's struggle with crystal clarity, but her eyes saw only potential content for her social media empire. She was so disconnected from reality, so absorbed in her digital world, that she failed to recognize that her nephew was dying. The lifeguards, positioned at opposite ends of the pool, had momentarily shifted their attention to other areas where larger groups of children were playing more obviously. The tragic irony was that help was everywhere. Multiple trained lifeguards, dozens of adult swimmers, and a loving aunt with a perfect view, yet nobody saw what was actually happening. Tommy's fight for survival was unfolding in plain sight, yet he was completely alone in the most crowded place imaginable. As Tommy's strength finally gave out completely, he slipped beneath the surface one final time, his small body sinking toward the bottom of the 9-foot-deep pool. The water closed over his head with barely a ripple, the kind of subtle disturbance that could easily be mistaken for normal swimming activity. From her lounge chair 20 feet away, Sarah felt a sudden, inexplicable chill despite the 94-degree heat. It was the kind of maternal instinct that defies explanation, a primal alarm that something was terribly wrong with her child. She sat up abruptly, her eyes scanning the pool frantically as she tried to locate Tommy among the other swimmers. Her heart began to race as she realized she couldn't see his distinctive blonde hair anywhere in the water. Jennifer, still recording, had captured the exact moment when Tommy disappeared beneath the surface, but she remained completely unaware of what her camera had documented. She continued filming for several more seconds, expecting her nephew to surface and continue the race, perhaps planning to use his temporary absence to build suspense in her video edit. It wasn't until Sarah's panicked scream pierced the air that Jennifer finally looked up from her phone screen and began to comprehend the gravity of the situation. But by then, precious seconds had already been lost, seconds that could mean the difference between life and death for an 8-year-old boy who had trusted the adults in his life to keep him safe. The perfect summer day was about to transform into every parent's worst nightmare. Sarah's scream cut through the ambient noise of the pool area like a knife, causing heads to turn and conversations to stop mid-sentence. Without hesitation she launched herself into the water, still fully clothed in her sundress and sandals. The cotton fabric immediately became heavy and restrictive, but adrenaline drove her forward as she swam toward the spot where she had last seen Tommy. The water felt like thick syrup as she fought against her waterlogged clothes, her lungs burning with the effort of holding her breath as she dove down into the deep end. The pool's bottom seemed impossibly far away, and the chlorinated water stung her eyes as she searched desperately for any sign of her son. Meanwhile, Jennifer stood frozen at the pool's edge, her phone still in her hand, her mind struggling to process what was happening. The lifeguards had finally noticed the commotion and were mobilizing, their whistles shrieking across the resort as they called for backup and cleared other swimmers from the area. One of them, a young man named Marcus who had been working at the resort for 3 summers, dove in to assist Sarah in the search. The pool area had transformed from a place of leisure into a scene of desperate urgency, with resort staff running to coordinate emergency response and other guests gathering in horrified silence. Sarah's lungs felt like they were about to explode as she surfaced for air, only to dive back down immediately, driven by the primal need to find her child. Time seemed to move both incredibly slowly and terrifyingly fast, each second stretching into eternity while simultaneously rushing toward a conclusion that no mother should ever have to face. After what felt like hours but was actually only 90 seconds, Sarah's searching hands finally made contact with Tommy's small limp form near the bottom of the pool. With strength she didn't know she possessed, she hauled him to the surface, his body impossibly heavy and frighteningly still. Marcus, the lifeguard, immediately took over, pulling Tommy to the pool's edge with practiced efficiency while Sarah struggled to stay afloat in her waterlogged clothes. The moment Tommy's unconscious form was lifted onto the concrete deck, the scene erupted into controlled chaos. Resort staff had already called 911, and the sound of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance. Marcus began CPR immediately, his training taking over as he worked to restart Tommy's breathing and heartbeat. Sarah hauled herself out of the pool, water streaming from her dress as she knelt beside her son's pale, motionless body. His lips had a bluish tint that made her stomach lurch with terror, and she had to fight the urge to shake him, to demand that he wake up and be okay. The crowd of onlookers formed a respectful circle around the emergency scene, many of them parents themselves, understanding the horror that Sarah was experiencing. Jennifer remained at the outskirts of the group, still clutching her phone, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. The video she had been recording was still playing on her screen, showing the exact moments when her nephew had needed her most and she had failed him completely. As Marcus continued chest compressions and rescue breathing, everyone held their breath, praying for a miracle that would bring Tommy back from the edge of death. After what seemed like an eternity of CPR, Tommy suddenly coughed up pool water, his small body convulsing as he expelled the chlorinated liquid from his lungs. The sound of his first gasping breath was the most beautiful thing Sarah had ever heard, and she collapsed with relief as color slowly returned to his face. The crowd of onlookers burst into spontaneous applause, tears streaming down many faces as they witnessed a life being saved in real time. Tommy's eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened, but unmistakably alive. The paramedics arrived moments later, taking over Tommy's care with professional efficiency as they loaded him onto a stretcher for transport to Tampa General Hospital. Sarah climbed into the ambulance with her son, her dress still dripping pool water, her hands shaking with residual adrenaline and overwhelming gratitude. As the ambulance pulled away from the resort, she held Tommy's small hand and whispered prayers of thanksgiving, her heart still racing from the closest call of her life. Jennifer followed in a taxi, her phone finally silent for the first time in hours, the magnitude of what had almost happened beginning to sink in. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that Tommy would make a full recovery, though he would need to stay overnight for observation to ensure there were no complications from the near drowning. The medical staff praised the quick response of the lifeguard and the fact that Tommy had only been underwater for a relatively short time. It was a miracle, they said, that there would be no lasting damage. But while Tommy's body would heal completely, the emotional scars of that day were just beginning to form, particularly the growing questions about what Jennifer had actually seen and done during those crucial moments. In the sterile silence of Tommy's hospital room that night, as he slept peacefully under the watchful eyes of medical monitors, Sarah began to replay the events of the afternoon with the analytical mind that had served her well as a nurse. Something about Jennifer's behavior didn't sit right with her, though she couldn't quite articulate what it was. Her sister had seemed genuinely shocked and remorseful, visiting Tommy multiple times and bringing him flowers and balloons, but there was something hollow about her distress, something performative that made Sarah's instincts prickle with unease. During one of Jennifer's visits, Sarah had noticed her sister taking photos of Tommy in his hospital bed, supposedly to update their family members, but the way she angled the shots and adjusted the lighting seemed too calculated for genuine concern. When Sarah gently asked Jennifer to put her phone away, her sister had become defensive, claiming she was just trying to document Tommy's recovery for their parents. But Sarah had seen Jennifer's phone screen for a brief moment and noticed that she had been editing the photos with filters and captions, treating even this near tragedy as content for her social media presence. The more Sarah thought about it, the more disturbed she became by her sister's actions throughout the entire incident. Jennifer had been standing right at the pool's edge with a clear view of the water, yet she had somehow failed to notice that Tommy was drowning. It seemed impossible unless she had been so absorbed in her phone that she had completely lost touch with reality. Sarah wanted to give her sister the benefit of the doubt, but the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong continued to grow stronger as the night wore on. 3 days after the incident, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Marcus, the lifeguard who had helped save Tommy's life. His voice was tight with concern as he explained that the resort's security footage from that day had been reviewed as part of their standard incident report, and there was something she needed to see. Sarah's heart sank as she realized that whatever was on that footage had deeply disturbed a professional who had seen numerous pool emergencies over his years of work. She arranged to meet Marcus at the resort's security office the following morning, bringing Jennifer along despite her sister's obvious reluctance to return to the scene. The resort's head of security, a former police officer named Detective Rivera, greeted them with a somber expression that immediately set Sarah's nerves on edge. He explained that the resort maintained multiple camera angles on all pool areas for safety and liability reasons, and that the footage from Tommy's incident had been preserved in high definition. As they settled into chairs facing a large monitor, Detective Rivera warned them that what they were about to see would be difficult to watch. The timestamp on the screen read 2:34 p.m. as the video began to play, showing the crowded pool deck in crystal-clear detail. Sarah watched herself reading in the lounge chair, Tommy lining up with his friends at the pool's edge, and Jennifer positioning herself with her phone to record the race. Everything looked exactly as Sarah remembered it, but she knew that something in this seemingly innocent footage had alarmed the security staff enough to call her in for a private viewing. As the security footage continued to play, Sarah watched in growing horror as the terrible truth began to unfold on the screen. The cameras had captured everything with merciless clarity. Tommy struggling in the deep end, his small arms flailing as he tried to stay afloat, his repeated attempts to call for help as he slipped beneath the surface again and again. But most shocking of all was Jennifer's behavior throughout the entire ordeal. The footage showed her standing at the pool's edge with a perfect, unobstructed view of Tommy's distress, her phone held up and recording continuously as her nephew fought for his life. Far from being oblivious to the situation, Jennifer's body language on the video suggested full awareness of what was happening. The camera captured her adjusting her position multiple times to get better angles of Tommy's struggle, zooming in and out with her phone as if she were directing a movie scene. Most damning of all, the footage showed a moment when Tommy surfaced and clearly called out Jennifer's name, reaching toward her for help. Jennifer's response, captured in devastating detail, was to continue recording while taking a step back from the pool's edge. She had seen everything, heard everything, and had chosen to document her nephew's near-death experience rather than save him. The silence in the security office was deafening as the video ended. Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach, her breath coming in short gasps as the magnitude of her sister's betrayal sank in. Jennifer sat motionless in her chair, her face drained of all color, caught in a lie that no amount of explanation could justify. The ride back to Sarah's house was conducted in absolute silence, the weight of what they had just witnessed hanging between the sisters like a toxic cloud. Sarah's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, her mind reeling from the revelation that her own sister had watched her son nearly drown and had done nothing to help. When they reached Sarah's modest two-bedroom home in a quiet Tampa suburb, Jennifer finally attempted to break the silence with a stammering explanation that only made things worse. She claimed that she hadn't realized how serious the situation was, that through the phone screen it had looked like Tommy was just playing in the water, that she had frozen in panic and didn't know what to do. But Sarah had seen the footage, had watched her sister deliberately position herself to get better shots of Tommy's struggle, had witnessed the calculated cruelty of Jennifer's actions. The confrontation that followed was explosive, years of suppressed resentment and sibling rivalry erupting into the open as Sarah demanded to know how Jennifer could have let her own nephew nearly die for the sake of social media content. Jennifer's defense crumbled under the weight of the evidence, her lies becoming more desperate and contradictory with each passing moment. She tried to claim that she had been in shock, that she hadn't understood what she was seeing, but the security footage told a different story entirely. Sarah realized that her sister was not just selfish or thoughtless, but genuinely disturbed, capable of prioritizing her online image over human life, even the life of a child she claimed to love. The argument raged for hours, neighbors undoubtedly hearing the shouting through the thin walls, until finally Jennifer broke down completely and admitted the unthinkable truth.